Thanks so much, everyone who's joining us this evening for our Becoming a Forensic Scientist taster session. And just as an introduction, my name is Jess and I work in the University Partnerships team at Unifrog. And we're really lucky to be joined by Professor Ian Turner from the University of Derby, who is going to be leading us through this session. It's a super popular topic at the moment. Around forensics, law, criminology. Really excited to sit through this session. But Ian, I'm going to hand over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Jess. And it's great to see so many people sign up. So my name's Ian Turner. I'm from the University of Derby. And I'm here today to talk to you about the wonder of forensic science. It's a subject I've been teaching for 20 years. I know it's hard to believe, but I've studied it even longer. So when I talk about forensic science, one of the first things people always think of is a TV show. So this is a picture of CSI, which is a show which is probably around before many of you were born. Perhaps you can think of another one like Dexter or Bones or something similar. And here we've got a stereotypical image from one of these shows with a group of people crowded around a complex crime scene. You can see a deceased victim on the floor. See the stereotypical silver grey case, the crime scene tape in the background. And we've got investigators going to the crime scene, going into the lab and analysing that evidence, and then going to arrest the suspects from themselves and getting that prosecution. So the sadness is not like that. But the good news is I think it's actually even better than those shows can actually convey. So what is forensic science actually like? So this is probably more close to reality. So this is a picture of a CSI, crime scene investigator. Sometimes in the UK, they're called SOCOs, scenes of crimes officers, examining some evidence outside. And you can probably just make out on the floor something that looks like a cigarette butt that's surrounded by a ruler. And the CSI is there taking some photographs of some evidence. You still see the CSI case. You notice that the CSI is wearing a rather attractive set of garb. And this garb is what we call a bunny suit, and it's from head to toe. You'll notice that they're also wearing some attractive covers over their shoes, booty covers, gloves, and a face mask. And this is all because we don't want the scene to be contaminated. Booty covers, foot marks, the full suit stops hair and fibres being transferred. The face mask, likewise, saliva. Did you know, and this is a gross fact for anybody who's sitting with somebody else, when you speak, saliva transfers from your mouth for about 1 meter in all directions. And obviously that saliva can contain DNA. Gloves are obviously present fingerprints. So being a CSI is very much methodical, patience, collecting, organising, strategic thinking, and capturing that kind of data. And in the UK especially, the CSI is a different job to the forensic scientist. So the CSI collects all that evidence, processes the crime scene, returns the evidence to the police force, who then engage forensic scientists to do the kind of more scientific analysis, which is mostly analytical chemistry, biological sciences, particularly molecular biology. Then the forensic scientists return that back to the police force, who make decisions about what must be next be done in the criminal justice period. So that's what the reality is like in a more mundane way. But what about a real crime scene? So just a quick warning here. Obviously, my talk is about forensic science, and I'm talking about real crimes. And certainly from this point on, you can see some images which do include things like blood and deceased victims of crimes. Just want to give you that warning before I press the next slide button. So this is a real crime scene picture. And what you can probably make out straight away is that the scene is very, very messy. There's lots of blood on the floor. You can see a shoe lying there. And the reason I show this picture is not to startle or for dramatic effect anyone, just to show how complicated crime scenes are. When you've got a cigarette butt lying on the floor, like you can see in the previous image, it's easy to see the evidence to take a photograph. But how on earth would you start processing this crime scene? And there's so much blood everywhere, splattered up the walls. Where would you start in terms of trying to analyse that? So it does require some quite complex strategic thinking, management and organisational skills, which are all things that we look for in forensic science students and graduates when it comes to that. Just like to reassure anybody, even though there's an awful lot of blood there, the person who did leave this blood at the crime scene was actually okay post-incident. I know there's an enormous lot of blood. Of interest in this picture, though, just behind the shoe, you can see some blood on the wall. We call this blood spatter. So it's a type of forensics analysis where we look at patterns on the walls and surfaces, and we can work out things like direction of which the person was hit, what shape implement was used to hit them, and how long the blood has been there based by how much is dribbled down towards the floor. In fact, this uses maths, physics and maths. So it's actually a genuine use of trigonometry, which I know is something that you probably don't think you're going to use much afterwards. So, you're probably here because you're kind of interested in forensic science. So before I go into a little bit of detail on some of the sort of famous areas in it and illustrated through cases, I just want to say a little bit about what forensic science is or what it's not. So in its most part, forensic science is really three things. The first one of those is biology, particularly molecular biology, so genetics, DNA, and those kind of areas. Though, as we'll see, there are elements of ecology and all other kind of things. The second area is chemistry. So that chemistry is much more analytical chemistry than organic chemistry. So the separation sciences and the analysis sciences. And then the last part would be the contextualization of that within the criminal justice system. So that's what the word forensic actually means. It means science in the context of the law. And what this lovely little slide here shows you just some of the areas that come into forensic science. So from toxicology, which is things like poisons and drugs of abuse, and most of the work there would be with, illegal recreational drugs. Ballistics, so, gunshot residue and firearms, physical trajectory of bullets and other projectiles. But perhaps a couple of interesting ones on there you haven't heard of before. First of all, highlight you to the word beneath biology, which says entomology. So this is a study of insects. So when someone or something dies, the body is colonized by fly eggs, which hatch into maggots, and these maggots hatch into flies. And they help in the decomposition process. So forensic scientists study these. So in my own institution, we have a burial site where this takes place, where we go and collect the maggots. We bring them back to the laboratory. We grow them up into flies. And then once we see that they're flies, we can work out what species they are by looking at their characteristics. And then by cross-referencing with things like temperature and humidity, we can work out how long the body has been there. So establishing time of death. So a really cool principle. And the last one I just mentioned is the one beneath entomology, which is paleontology, which is the study of pollen grains. So that's probably something you may not have thought about before. But I'll give a really good example towards the end of this talk of where pollen grains were really, really useful in a high-profile claim. So hopefully on that list, you can see at least one word that you find interesting. And I think that's the beauty of forensic science. It's just such a diverse subject. And it takes those foundational scientists you've learned at school and college and translate them into these really interesting topical areas where you can make a real difference. So what is forensic science really? So I'd like to use the bulk of my talk now to just take you through some famous forensic cases to illustrate a couple of key areas of forensic evidence. But before I do that, I really need to start about where forensics came from. So forensics, as a sort of a genuine discipline, probably didn't start the turn of the 19th century. And this gentleman that you can see at the front of the picture is really regarded as the father of forensic science. His name is Edmond Locard, and he studied medicine and law at Lyon in France. In fact, he actually studied on another famous forensic criminology type person called Alexandre Lacassagne, who's a very interesting character and worth looking up post this session. So he became assistant to Alexandre in 1910, and then he set up probably the world's first criminal laboratory. So basically, he persuaded the police department of Lyon to give him 2 attic rooms above the police station. And he set up what was the first police laboratory, and he carried on working there all the way until his death in 1966. But why he's so famous is he published a monumental 7-volume work called Traits de Criminalistique, which sets the kind of core principles of forensic science. And one of those is definitely worth showing you here. And this is my only slide with a large number of text on it, for which I apologize. So this is an extract of his work. And it's often pigeonholed to the big words you can see at the bottom, which are every contact leaves a trace. And I'm just going to highlight a bit in green here to show you what I mean. So in his work, Lockhart says, physical evidence cannot be wrong. It cannot perjure itself. It cannot be wholly absent. Only human failure to find it, study it, and understand it can diminish its value. So what he's saying here, in essence, is that evidence, physical evidence of things happening is always there. So if I were to sit on a chair and get back up again, I've left part of myself on that chair, and that chair has left part of itself upon me. And there's no denying that. It can't be wrong, and likewise, there's no chance I didn't leave part of myself upon that chair. And if I can't find part of myself on that chair, the failure is with me, as in the techniques I've got, my observation skills in order to find it. And this every contact leaves a trace principle is still very true in forensics now. So I'm going to prove that now with a couple of case studies. So first of all, I need to show you this very exciting triangle. It's actually quite an important triangle, though it's quite simplistic. So what you've got here is the scene, the victim, and the suspect. So I know on television, sometimes all these three things are in the same place at one time, but the reality is often not the case. And of course, we could have multiple scenes is often the case as well. I'd like you to particularly note the colors of the arrows that you can see on the screen here, because they're going to come back to us in a minute. So in order to illustrate to you the importance of this triangle, let's talk about a famous case. So the famous case I'd like to mention is a very sad one, and it's the disappearance and sadly murder of Sarah Payne. So this case was all the way back in the 2000s. She's actually reported missing on the 1st of July 2000. And as you can see from the picture of there, she was a beautiful 8-year-old girl who lived in West Sussex. Essentially, she was away on vacation. She was playing with some brothers and cousins. There's some sort of minor disagreement. She left to return home on her own. She didn't return. So she was reported missing straight away. And there was a large nationwide manhunt for her. Person hunt for her. And sadly, as I've already alluded to, eventually her body was discovered on the 17th of July, so 16 days after her disappearance. So early on in the investigation, they did have a principal suspect, and the suspect's name was Roy Whiting. So he was a known sex offender. He was on the sex offender register, and he lived within about 8 kilometres of Polborough where she went missing. And on the screen here, you can see, as well as a picture of Sarah herself, a white van. So this is Roy's van, which he used quite a lot. And on the top right, you can see a whole host of artifacts that are found within Roy's van. So there's a red jumper on there, some socks. You can see just about in the background a checked kind of shirt. And there was a clown pattern curtain as well lying in there. Also, there were a series of petrol receipts found inside the door. And finally, on the bottom right, you can see one of Sarah's shoes. It's a black Velcro shoe. So this is an amazing find. So in part of the person hunt for the person who killed her, someone rang up the police and literally said, I'm just driving quite a long way from where she went missing, but I did notice a shoe on the side of the road. It's probably got nothing to do with it, but ringing in case. And it was Sarah's shoe identified by her family. Right. So we've got all the information in place. Right. So now let's go back to our little diagram. So on the top, I've got 3 types of evidence. So physical placement, that means something being in that place. It's confirmed that they were there at that time. Red, we've got DNA analysis. And green, we've got hairs and fibers. So let's put all the objects I just showed you on the previous slide there. So we've got Sarah's body, her hair, and some of her hair was separate from her body. Then we've got the socks, the red jumper and the clown pattern curtains from Roy's van. Got Roy himself, Roy's van, and the shoe. So they're all the objects in the crime scene. So physically, when Roy's van was seized, they found all of these objects in his van as illustrated by blue arrows. Physically, Sarah's shoe was identified by her family, and the proximity of her hair to her body was another physical placement. So now let's do some DNA analysis. So DNA confirmed that was Sarah's hair. DNA confirmed it was her shoe. DNA confirmed that Sarah had come in contact with the curtain, which you can see there in the bottom right. And obviously the van and all the objects in Roy's van had his material on them. And finally, if we look at hairs and fibres, they found Sarah's hairs and fibres on the artifacts from the van and itself. And they found fibres from the curtain actually on Sarah's shoe. The key thing about this diagram, and this is the end of the diagram, is if you look at Roy Whiting, the principal suspect, you will see that there are zero arrows that directly connect him to Sarah. So hopefully this diagram is illustrating to you the beautiful, and I use that word cautiously when I'm talking about a horrible crime scene, but ultimately forensics was used to bring somebody to justice in showing the interconnected between multiple parts and how the analysis, in this case of hairs, fibres and DNA, connected them together. So there was other incidental evidence as well. Roy had an alibi in the early stages of the crime, but they managed to disprove that by looking at the petrol receipts inside of his car and showed that he was fueled at a station nearby where she went disappeared. And there was other incidental matters as well. But the forensic aspects were a key part of the case of the prosecution. And just to finish the story, Roy was charged with the abduction and murder on 6th of February 2001. So, almost a year after the crime. He's remanded in custody to the 14th of November 2001. And the 12th of December, he's found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, where he still resides. So that's quite a powerful story. Let's look at some forensic evidence specifically. So I'd like to start by talking about fingerprints. Fingerprints is something that people talk about quite a lot, but maybe you even know something about them yourself. So fingerprints are made of fiction ridge skin. It's only found on a couple of places in your body, actually. So on your fingers and your palms of your hand and on the soles of your feet. And as you can see from the pretty picture here, it's a series of elevations and depressions, or ridges and valleys, that roughly run parallel to one another. And the reason it's called friction ridge is based on what it does. But one of its key characteristics is it's devoid of hair or hair follicles. So there's no hair coming out of those. And often it's devoid of pigmentation. So it doesn't often match the color of the rest of your skin as well. It's called friction ridge because what it does three really important things. Your sense of touch, what you feel when you touch things. It's very important in temperature regulation. So when you sweat, the massive surface area on these parts of your body help you control your temperature. And finally, it helps you grip. So an easy proof of this is if you soaked your hands in the bath or the shower for a while and you get up and pick a glass, sometimes it slides through your hands. That's because you've changed the shape of your friction ridge skin. Now, in forensic science, we use friction ridge skin to identify people. So you've probably heard of loops, whorls, and arches, which are the top level fingerprint patterns. We call them the primary classes. So, in a UK Caucasian population, around 65% are whorls, around 60% are whoops, 30% are whorls, about 5% are arches. But we don't really use those. We use, first of all, the level 1 features. And there's 13 different of those. There's just an illustration of 6 on the slide. And you can see it's the same words I've said before, loops, whorls, and arches, but some different differentiations for them. But what we're really interested in are the level 2 and level 3 features. Level 2 features are, the ridge path and the friction ridge events. So the small patterns that occur in those ridges. But really, really interested in the third level detail. So ridge dimensional attributes, where the sweat pores are located, the little dots you can see on the bottom left. The position and shape in them, that's called poroscopy. The edge profile and shape, that's called edgeology. So quite minute detail. And the reason we're interested in these is because everybody's fingerprints are unique. And we can prove that in statistical terms, which I won't go into today. One question I'm always asked when I do these kind of talks is, what about identical twins? And the answer is identical twins do not have identical fingerprints. You may be saying, why? And the reason is fairly simplistic. So if we look at how fingers emerge, so, fingerprint ridge detail is, set by the age, starts to be set by the 12 to 13 weeks apart after fertilization, so very early. After 6 weeks, you get bulges appear on the hand, which is what those big lumps are that you can see there. But the rate of growth and the position in the womb, including the flow of amniotic fluid over there, all have influences on your final fingerprint ridge pattern. In a way, genetically, identical twins have the same, finger morphology, but their relative position and the flows of fluid and those other aspects lead to different fingerprints. So there you go. Now you know the answer. So what we do in crime scenes. So, in crime scenes, we can identify people from their fingerprints, and we can get fingerprints from any product. And what you can see on this slide here are a range of chemical compounds lifting fingerprints from plastic, from glass, from wood, from paper. We can even leave fingerprint from skin. I always remember a famous case where they recovered a body in the Lake District in a black bin bag, which had been underwater for 12 years. They took out the body, took out the bin bag, dried it slowly and carefully, and then managed to release a fingerprint, which had been on the underwater for all that time. And that's because fingerprints are made of proteins, which are water soluble, and fats, sebaceous fats, which aren't. So we often take fingerprints from the deceased in order to help identify them. So here's a picture which I know is not very pleasant, but trying to fingerprint a deceased body. So because fingerprints are unique, they can be really useful. Of course, there's a massive caveat on that, in the sense that, you've got to have a reference point. People often forget this. It's the same with DNA as well. In order to identify some of the fingerprints, you've got to have something to compare it against. So we do have a database of fingerprints, but only those who have been arrested of a crime and within a certain time period are typically on it. So fingerprints from dead bodies is common. In fact, it's quite a gross kind of concept, but very important. So often we have to take the fingers off in order to realize them, because, as I always said, when you get them wet, they don't really work. So we sometimes have to take them off in order to process them and get them done. So I want to move on to DNA. I'm running out of time, so I want to quickly talk about DNA, because DNA is probably the most common forensic evidence that the general public talk about. And, we can't talk about that without talking about a very famous case involving two lovely young ladies, Linda Mann Top and Dawn Ashworth, who disappeared all the way back in the 1980s, which I know seems an incredibly long time ago. So in 1983, Linda disappeared. 1986, Dawn disappeared. What's key about this is they're both in for quite different locations, but both in Leicestershire. So 3 years apart, two young ladies went missing, unfortunately sexually assaulted and died. Normally, you wouldn't connect those, but they did look at the enzyme profile of semen found from the victims, and they found some comparisons, which led to a kind of national-wide person hunt. And very quickly, a suspect came to mind, and it was a chap called Richard Buckland, who you can see in the bottom left is 17. And Richard actually did confess to the crime, and he had detailed knowledge of Dawn's body, which led him to the police to suspect that he had been in the vicinity of the body. So about this time, a chap who you may well have heard of called Alec Jeffreys comes into the fray. So now Sir Alec Jeffreys, and he was doing disease research, nothing to do with forensics at all, on DNA. And they asked him if they could employ his technology in relation to this case. And he did. And you've probably seen images like these before. This is called a DNA ladder. And what you can see here is semen samples extracted from the bodies of Linda and Dawn. And you can probably just see from the pattern that they match. They then took blood from Buckland, and what you can see is it does not match. Therefore, what the police are saying is the semen on that body did not come from Buckland. So, hence the investigation. And to cut a long story short, they started to DNA profile everybody, males of a certain age within the vicinity of Narborough and Leicestershire where the bodies were found. And they spent a lot of money and they weren't getting anywhere. And then they had one of those serendipitous moments where this gentleman here, was overheard talking in a pub and bragging that he hadn't given away his DNA, his blood sample, because he was worried about getting caught for some historic traffic offences and had paid one of his friends to do it. Thankfully, someone overheard, reported it. Cut a long story short, he was arrested, and this gentleman, Richard Colin Pitchfork, was found to match, and he was arrested and convicted of the crime. In fact, he's got a horrible history of 1,000 previous indecent exposures, historic incidents of rape, etc. So if you speak to Alex Jeffreys, which I've had the pleasure of, he's often said as the first person to convict somebody on DNA evidence. And he says, no. I was the first person to prove somebody innocent using DNA evidence, which is Richard Buckland. And in case you're wondering how he had detailed knowledge of the body, so Richard probably had come across the bodies and panicked, and he obviously remembered some of the details. And I suspect under cross-examination with leading questions, he was led to present the scenario that was given. So DNA fingerprint is still very important today. It's much more complicated now. So we don't use the stereotypical example that we used there. We use short tandem repeats. We take very small amounts of DNA. Some would say as small as touching the end of a matchstick. We amplify it using a technique called PCR, polymerase chain reaction, to make loads and loads of it. And then we separate out and make a full DNA fingerprint. Can't do that justice in such a short talk, but a really interesting science. So what's the latest? So the latest would be something called familial searching. So you probably know that you share genetic material with your parents, and some of you may think reluctantly with your siblings, but even your cousins, aunts, uncles. Obviously it dilutes. But now with the DNA database, you can actually use that to help with historic cold cases. So top left, we've got a 64-year-old man who was arrested for murdering a Bath teenager 32 years after her death. The gentleman's name is Christopher Hampton. He's a painter and decorator, father of three. And the reason he was arrested is one of his daughters was cautioned for criminal damage, and a sample was taken from and added to the database. And obviously 50% matched her father. At the bottom, we've got another example. Excuse me. So this is the Dearne Valley shoe rapist, James Lloyd. He's 49 when he's arrested, and 20 years hence, he committed quite a severe series of horrific rapes where he kept shoes and stockings as like a trophy from the crime. And he was traced through DNA from his sister, who was arrested for a road traffic offence. And he hadn't committed any crimes in the 20 years hence, but they caught him because of that. So really quite powerful. And to finish off, I'll give one final example, and I'm back to the pollen as promised. So, DNA and fingerprints, everybody knows about those. They're the cool evidence, the sexy evidence types. But pollen and soil, incredibly important. Incredibly differential. So we use techniques called geographical profiling. So as you walk round outside, pollen grains go up your nostrils, and we can extract those pollen grains from your nostrils, and we can work out, where you've been, by what plants you may have been in, as long as we have habitat maps and those kind of things. And soil travels everywhere. Perhaps the best example of this would be this famous case, which is a really, really terrible case from Soham in Cambridgeshire, where Holly and Jessica, two young girls, went missing. So they left a sports centre in Soham around 6:30 p.m. And then disappeared, never to be seen alive again. So there's lots of important evidence in this crime. One really important was digital forensics, but which is the future, which is the way to go for sure, where they managed to track a pinged signal from Jessica's mobile phone. And crucially, given where they were rurally, this pinged off a different phone mast from most people in the village, which pinpointed them to their primary suspect, was a chap called Ian Huntley. But where did the pollen come in? So Ian Huntley disposed of the bodies quite some distance away, and he had changed the tyres on his cars, all four of them, which is obviously suspicious anyway. But as you can see from the picture at the bottom left, they're actually capturing mud from the wheel rim, and they managed to match that mud and the pollen grains within it, the vegetation in the top right where the body was discovered. And that vegetation, it didn't match a profile of anywhere that he'd said he'd been. They also used vegetation and pollen to help find the bodies. So you can see a broken weed here. So looking at some broken weeds and how long it takes for them to regrow and reform, they can pinpoint the time point when they've been there, look for disruptive vegetation and find the bodies. And my last couple of slides were just to show that soil and pollen is also very important in historic crimes. So this is a picture, in terms of Bosnian war crimes. And this is some lovely work by Professor Tony Brown at the University of Exeter. So where he's using pollen and changing soil characteristics to help find out, where people have come from. Unfortunately, in these genocides, bodies were dumped from a wide range of locations in one place. And by looking at soil and pollen, they can help repatriate them to their correct origin. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour before forensics. And you'll forgive me for just saying a little bit of word about forensics where I'm from. So we offer 2 forensic science programs, forensic science and forensic science with criminology. And the main difference between the two is in the second one with criminology, slightly more focus on miscarriage of justice and the British judicial system and victimology, with a little less focus on some of the chemical or biological techniques. At Derby, we have some wonderful facilities. We have a super lab which holds 200, just about to launch, full forensic lab, special imaging facility, an anthropology facility which is ancient human remains, a bug lab, chemistry labs with state-of-the-art kit. We also have a full forensic training facility, which is a forensic house with 7 scene rooms, including a blood spatter room, with cameras and replica crime scene facilities. So hopefully that's whetted your appetite and look forward to some questions. Final 2 comments. The little URL link there, the QR code, will take you to the Derby webpage if you're interested. And just at the bottom, I put my email address in case you don't get a chance to have your question. I'll be more than happy to be contacted. Okay, so I'm going to hand back to Jess now to see if you've got any questions or comments.
Amazing. Thanks so much. That was, super interesting. As I said at the beginning, I was really excited for this one, and it definitely did not disappoint. So thanks so much, Ian. That was, super interesting. We have had quite a few questions come through. So probably the easiest way to do it is I'll read them out, Ian, and then we can, kind of go from there. We've had a few that kind of similar themes. So maybe we'll start with the most common. So quite a few students asking, what sorts of subjects would you recommend a student doing at A-level? Is there anything perhaps that a student could do outside of their A-levels to kind of get them prepared to study a degree like this?
Yeah, sure. So it doesn't matter where you want to study forensic science, Derby or elsewhere, almost every forensic science degree program will ask you for a science. And that science should be either biology or chemistry. So in terms of A levels, if you do, that's what you choose to do, then one or other, and both is an advantage. Though most universities, in mine included, don't mind if you've only got one of those. In fact, roughly half of our students only have one of the sciences and we pick them up on the other one. And most universities, including my own, are also very keen on BTECs, particularly applied science BTECs. A lot of students come in that route. So basically science, the more science you can do, the better. In terms of other subjects, there's nothing really that you should do what you enjoy. As long as you've got that core science, you should do what you enjoy. Though, like a lot of things in life, maths, psychology, law would all be advantages, but, not essential by any stretch of the imagination.
Brilliant. Okay, so I've got one here that has just popped up, which I want to ask. I think it's really interesting. Someone said, "Hello, I would be really interested in getting into this, but how do I get over a dislike of bodily fluids?" Is there a trick to that?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, dealing with forensic science, you are dealing with, that kind of matter. So, I mean, the key answer to that question is that the forensic scientist, the person in the laboratory, is processing things in test tubes, evidence bags, machinery. So they aren't involved in the kind of collection of the samples from the site. So, yeah, if you are a little squeamish, forensic scientist rather than CSI, yeah, for sure.
That's very good to know. Okay, brilliant. So I've got another one here. What sort of work experience would you recommend for maybe a year 12 student?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I wish there was a nice answer to this. Unfortunately, forensic science, because it's live criminal cases, the professional world just don't take work experience. So there's two answers to that question. I mean, any work experience in a biology or chemistry environment, and it doesn't matter whether it's in environmental chemistry, bioengineering, doesn't matter what it is, any lab type experience is beneficial. Also, many universities do offer work experience. So we offer a STEM Science Week, which includes forensic science. So try local science firms or try your local university, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that was a really good shout. Yeah, I think lots of universities will offer as much support as they can give. Like you said, it's super hard to get direct experience in it. What else have we got here that's coming through? Lots of questions of like similar sorts of things. What characteristics are needed to be a crime scene investigator? What sort of person might make a good CSI?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's an answer to that, and I say that genuinely, not because I'm just trying to fudge an answer, because I mean, in the world we're always told about conforming to like an idealized standard, and you should be who you are. I mean, but I think generally skills around planning and organization and being methodical are useful, but also being strategic, and I think probably my number one skill would being a critical thinker. So thinking outside the box and those kind of things. So I'm sure at school or college you've been told about employability skills, and whatever you've been told by your teachers or career advisors is absolutely true. They are really important for being successful in forensic science.
Excellent. So I've got a couple of questions about the specific degree at Derby. So somebody has asked if this degree involves any placement work, and then somebody else has asked what grades they would need to get in.
Yeah, sure. So I will answer for Derby, but also generally for the sector, to be fair. Derby's entry requirements are 112 points, UCAS points, which in A-levels BBC, and I think in BTEC's distinction merit. And, most universities are around that mark in terms of level. But Derby, we have a foundation year. So that's a 4-year rather than a 3-year for those who perhaps didn't achieve what they wanted at A-level or took the wrong A-levels. So there's always a path to success, so we have many mature students. Mature is basically anybody who's not come straight from school or college. Never be detracted by what you haven't done or how you performed. And we know exams are really tough. In terms of placements, most universities, including ours, have the option of an industrial placement year. As I said, they're quite hard to come by and competitive. Not necessarily going to student the highest grades, the students who interview with the police. So we have a relationship with EMSU, East Midlands Scientific Operation Unit, where many of our placement students go, for example.
Nice. Amazing. Okay, we're getting quite a few questions that are asking, what does the average day look like? What does the average week look like of somebody who is studying this at university? Perhaps actually, we've got a couple about what it looks like if you go into it as a career as well.
Yeah, so let's start with a career, because there is no average week. You never know what you're going to create. But we do break crime down into what we call volume crime and serious crime. Volume, as the name suggests, is more common. So, vehicle crime, which sometimes even separate, burglary and those kind of things. And serious crime would be the kind of horrible things that we don't need to dwell on an evening, including some of the examples I gave you. And naturally, they're quite rare. Though often CSIs are called to things which are completely innocent. Scenario, person dies at home, no one's found them for a few days. Look at the example of Gene Hackman in the news this week. Actually died of natural causes, but it looked suspicious, so CSIs were called and be part of the investigation there. In terms of a student, over 5 days, most universities you study 3 modules. So you probably have, a good 15 hours of lecture, seminar and practical time. And the rest of the time would be directed study. It's quite a big shift from being at school or college, I'd say, because at school or college, most of the content you need to know is directly delivered to you via materials. At university, we gradually transition away from that We find the structure and the framework for that, but then you learn yourself. So a lot of directed study.
Fab. Another question about the career path you might go into afterwards. A big one that's coming up is, what's the starting salary? What's an average salary? How much are you going to eat?
Yeah. I'm not sure that's Hez. I mean, I honestly don't know the answer to that question. But I mean, if you go to any of the major job boards and talk forensic, you'll see some examples on there. I mean, one thing to say, I mean, if you wanted to be an actual CSI, obviously those kind of jobs, are quite limited. I mean, many forensic science students from up and down the university do go into kind of forensic labs. There's 4 or 5 big firms that do forensic analysis. Nowadays, the police forces employ forensic scientists themselves to do some of the volume work. But many of our students, and I know you won't believe me, those of you listening, fall in love with either biology or chemistry, the one they didn't pick, and actually, are reconverted and end up going to study in some of those broader science areas. Some of them have even gone to be, science teachers because they love the subject so much. So, I think it gives you those core skills that many industries desire.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And actually, we'd had a few, that was going to be my next question. We've had some people basically saying, like, what about if maybe I haven't taken science at A-level, is there a route into it? Or what about if I'm not massively keen on science? And I think it's so funny that you've said some people actually end up doing it and then love it so much they go down the science route.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be a pure forensic science, I'm afraid science is your only answer. But that, there's criminalistics, which is more about the criminal justice system. There's forensic psychology, which is more about offender profiling and reintegrating offenders in society. So there's broad things in the area which are less reliant on the science background.
Perfect. Okay. I've had a question. I think it's related to an answer you gave before. Somebody's just asking, what is a foundation year?
Yeah, so many universities offer these. So instead of most degrees are 3 years full time, so this would be 4 years full time, and the funding's still available for those. So the first year is kind of like the equivalent in academic content to perhaps an A-level, and it's really designed for those people who probably need another year to get the foundational science knowledge, i.e., the exam scores didn't turn out like they wanted to, or they chose the wrong subjects. And, if you've done no science at all, and that's an entry requirement. And it's a very popular route. And I'll tell you something here, actually. Most of the students who do our foundation year get higher than average grades when they finish the 4 years than our other students, because they're much more dedicated. So.
Love that. Great. Okay. Just going to try and squeeze in. I've got one more question that I think is a really interesting one. How has digital forensics helped develop the forensic process? Do you have any examples of where digital evidence has been really impactful?
I mean, digital forensics is the way to go. If I could give you one piece of advice, which may have been your last question, so I'll do it now, it's learn to code. Learn Python. I mean, it's fundamental to everything. Absolutely. Because it's the foundation building blocks of being able to use AI algorithms and AI models. But digital forensics is absolutely key in all crime scenes, particularly those more serious crimes involving drug work. I mean, literally, when the police, because it is the police that go in first, enter, a suspected drug house, the first thing they go for is not the drugs being flushed down the toilet, but the modem, because that contains all the information you need. And actually in Leicestershire, they've got a specialist digital forensic unit, and you can study special digital forensic courses, and those require programming, physics, and maths as an entry requirement rather than science.
That is very cool. Very, very cool. Okay. Excellent. Well, maybe end on a Derby specific note. Somebody has said, what makes forensic science stand out at Derby compared to other universities? What are the facilities and optional modules like?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Instead, I'm going to flip it round and say there are 3 things that make a university feel like home for you. One is the course and the facilities. And, I absolutely welcome anybody here to come up for an open day and see the facilities for yourself. Me telling you about them can't be replaced by you visiting yourself. So that link will take you to those. Second is the place, the university itself. So much of university is a social experience. How do you feel in the library? Has it got the societies you want? And finally, the city itself. Could you see yourself living there and in that environment? So I think Derby's got a good blend of all those things. And, to pick out one thing, I think our forensic training facility is really, really quite cool. And so our students love spending time here.
Amazing. Wonderful. Well, we're pretty much bang on time. Something that I will just quickly say, so we did have quite a few questions coming in that were like super specific around different combinations of A levels that students are taking, things around entry requirements, that sort of thing. Obviously look on Derby's website. Definitely take a look there. As Ian's just mentioned as well, definitely going along to an open day if possible and going to speak to the team there. Also on Unifrog as well, you're able to compare Derby's courses. You're able to see more information about entry requirements. You are also able to see, we've got a forensic scientist subject library guide, careers library guide, so you can see things like the salaries, that sort of thing. So you can check all of that out on Unifrog too. And if you haven't already connected with the University of Derby off the back of this webinar, you can do that on their profile on Unifrog as well. Yeah. But I just want to say a massive, massive thank you. And I hope everybody has a lovely evening. And good luck for your talk tomorrow, Ian.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.